What is going on today, YouTube? Hope you guys are doing fantastic. Today, we're going to be doing a hunter tier list. Only going to be the physical gods because I just did the build guide, how to build hunters, walked through every single item. So now we got that out of the way. We're going to be going to the hunters, talking about them. We'll add in Olo, we'll add in Freya, we'll add in Kronos and Olo, Freya, Kronos, Sol. We'll add those 4 mages in. They aren't going to be on the list, but I'll talk about them at the end. But if you are curious about them, they will be at the end and I'll talk about them. And I'll tell you where they're placed, but they won't physically be placed there. Let's just jump right in. Starting with what the ranks mean. Not played means this is just not a god you should be playing. And I think I'll only put 1 god in there. I think the rest are fine. But there's 1 god that is just super, super low in win rates. And I think he's just not there with the rest of the hunters. S tier means this is the best hunter in the game. Play him every game. You could win every game because of how dominant he is. And yeah, F tier is this character is bad. Don't play him, but you can play him if you want. Starting with AMC, I actually think he's in a decent spot for most ranks. I think if you go to the top end, he might be a little bit weaker. But I think he actually farms really well in low levels. He farms really well in high levels. And I actually think he's in an okay spot with his build. The Bluestone build, Bluestone Trance, and then I think you just go the Marty build with it. Soul Eater, Fail Not, Crusher, Heartseeker. And I think the build is actually really good. I think AMC is in a fine spot. We'll put him in B. Anhur, kind of the same thing. Wins a lot of 1v1s. Obviously, you want to pick him into matchups that you can win or you can bully the enemy. Some matchups are a little risky, like into Olo Run, because Olo Run kind of just wins every 2v2. But as soon as Olo rotates out, it's a winnable matchup for the Anhur. But if you're so far behind that you can't win the 1v1, no reason to play him. But he is still pretty good, and he's in a solid spot. Now, this one might be surprising, because I know a lot of people think this god is strong, but he just doesn't win. And I think they buffed him, and he's definitely stronger, but he's just going from the weakest character in the game to probably a very average character. C tier means just C is average. I think he's fine. Can you play him? Yes. He loses a lot of laning phases because he's not very strong in laning phase. If you want to split push, he's still a very strong split pusher. He can ult over to team fights, but he's got a lot of bad matchups, and a lot of the bad characters are also good into him. So I don't know exactly where you'd even want to play him, but a lot of people think he's hard to gank. He can be a split pusher. He's hard to deal with if he gets ahead, but he's an average character. Ever since the buff to Artemis, I actually think she's been insane. I think you can do either the Bluestone or the auto attack build. I think the Bluestone build is a lot easier to use because you just drop Tusky and use your 3s, and if you can hit those, you're fine. And even if you're, getting blinked on, just being able to drop your ult and drop your 1 at your feet or use your 3 at your feet, you can almost out one-shot assassins who are trying to one-shot you, so she feels very good in that regard. She is a little weak in laning phase if you are getting ganked. She's very easy to sit on, camp on. A lot of Guardians make life really painful for her, but I still think she's very strong. She's one of the best late game hunters, and I think you should know how to play her, and I think she's one of the best hunters in the game. Cern's eaten a few nerfs in a row, and he no longer is the same type of character that he was before his nerfs. I still think he's fine. I think he's pretty average. He doesn't really win many 2v2s anymore. A lot of 1v1s he even can't win because of just how the game works out now with how low his damage is. He gets into melee range a lot of times, and he just gets bullied out of the melee range by either like a CC or just a dash to get the enemy away or you away. And his ult is very hard to confirm. If you're ahead, he can snowball pretty easily. He's also very good if he gets, he's very good if he gets a lead because he can solo you and he can also go for objectives, but he's very easy to kill late game, and he doesn't dominate the laning phase like he used to be able to. So we'll put him in average. Even though this character is getting a buff, she is still one of the worst characters in the game. Very, very few reasons to pick her. She is somewhat safe, but even in that regard, she's not that safe. She's got the worst ultimate in the build. Yeah, I'll say it. She's got the worst ult in the game. Her 1-2-3 is fine. Her passive is okay. Her ult is so bad, there's just no reason to pick her. She's an okay laning phase, but yeah, I think she's not very good, and I don't think there's a reason to play her in most games. Chernobog, best character in the game. They need to nerf him. He didn't get nerfed in this upcoming patch, so he'll stay in the S tier. Wins a lot of laning phases that he probably shouldn't. Super strong stim. Very, very safe. Global that's better than Apollo's. Strong 1v1, strong 2v2s. Map mobility. Safety in laning phase. I probably said the same thing like 9 times. Very good team fight late game. Can split push. Like no weaknesses. I think Chiron is fine. Maybe C/D tier. He's got an okay laning phase. He's got a really good late game, but it's kind of hard to get there sometimes. I'll put him in C tier. He's average. I think he's slightly under these 2 characters, but I still think he's fine. If you want to play to dive the enemy comp, Chiron still does that really well. He gets a lot of damage out. He is pretty safe, like surprisingly. He has good matchups into some assassins. The CC immunity that you get from your 1 makes him even safer into even more groups of assassins. 3 being knock immune is nice, but he can be interrupted out of it. But overall, I think he's got a fine kit. The build for him is also pretty good right now. But I don't think you're building Soul Eater. I think you're just doing the old, like Ullr build, the full cooldown build. I think that one's better. Chiron's fine. He's average. I'm going to put Cupid in D tier. I think this character is terrible. I think he has very few strengths. Yes, his ult is okay in some games, but in most games it's just useless. He's got a bad laning phase. He doesn't win like any 1v1s. He can maybe force out a relic and then beg for a gank, but he doesn't really punish having relics down very well. Even against gods like Apollo just ults out and Cupid really doesn't have the DPS to deal with it. He's bad late game, bad objective burn. His build right now is not very good. Yeah, D tier. Danzaburou. I like Danzaburou right now. I think he does good damage. I think his passive is nice for extra farming. Extra power leads to him just doing a lot more damage. He's got an okay laning phase, but you don't really care about laning phase. You want to get out of the laning phase and get to like the mid and late game. He's got a lot of like unique safety, some very sneaky abilities to get away from fights, but overall I think he's very good. He's a pretty hard god to dive a lot of the time because of just how much CC he has, and his 3 is an absolutely broken ability just at like a base level of standing still and reducing auto attack damage. So I'm gonna put Danzaburou in B tier. He's like above average. Hachiman, we'll put him in C tier. The buffs to him were nice, but unfortunately they've reverted a lot of them, so he's kind of fell back down to an average hunter who's kind of just safe. He has some really bad matchups. Gods like Susano, Fenrir chase him down, just kill him. There's not much he can really do. Late game, though, he's very strong around objectives. Drops his 2. He burns them. He's got also really good area damage around objectives with ult and 2, but very punishable. Doesn't win a lot of 2v2s. Doesn't really win 1v1s either unless he's just ahead, and it's kind of hard to get ahead on him anyway. Here it is. Our F tier or below F tier character, Heimdallr. I think Heim is so bad right now. I think a lot of what he wants to do is easily interruptible. He doesn't win a lot of 2v2s. He is safe, yes, but in his safety, he also has like no follow-up damage a lot of the times. He has no good CC like at a range to like set up his own auto attacks. His ult is good, but also can be really wonky and lead to you getting killed a lot if you miss it. Yeah, I think Heim is pretty bad. I think his build right now is pretty bad too. I think a lot of the times you're seeing like a crit hunter or a hunter with 1 crit item and then just full pen, and that build doesn't really work that well for Heim because the crit doesn't do enough damage, and then if the enemy goes spectral, you're just doing literally no damage with crit, so you really don't want to build crit, and then you lose a lot of 1v1s. Yeah, I think he's really bad right now. Hou Yi, very strong 1v1 character. Unfortunately, he loses 2v2s way too hard, and then he falls so far behind that he can't even win 1v1s. His clear is bad. He doesn't scale all that well into the late game. A lot of gods just kind of pick him off. A lot of assassins are just killing him. He gets dove really hard by the solo laners, and he can't really deal with the dive all that well. If you get ahead, yes, he can be good, but it's very hard to get ahead, and it's very punishing if you are behind. So we'll put him into pretty bad tier, down with Charybdis. I think Ishtar's a little bit underrated right now. I think she's in like B, C tier. She's a little difficult to play, like somewhat. I'm going to put her in B tier, but she's still got a very impactful ult. I think her problem is that she loses, or she gets just kind of dunked on by a lot of assassins late game, and it's very hard to live as her. But if you're ahead, and you should easily be able to get ahead in most matchups with Ishtar, she's very punishing in 1v1s, unlike Cupid. She forces relics and then can punish your relics being down. She can zone you really easily. She pressures shield camps really easily. She can walk to purples very easily. Her rotations to beacons very strong. She can fight at mid camps, and then she scales really well into the late game as a DPSer. Problem is she's not all too safe late game, kind of like Cern, but she just is better than Cern at kind of every other part of the game. You know, we got to put Izanami in A tier because she wins so much that there's just no reason to put her any lower. She dominates low level, and she actually dominates a lot of high level games too, just because of how easy she gets ahead in most matchups. She's kind of fodder for a lot of junglers, but even then, it doesn't really matter all that much. If you get ahead and you build maybe 1-2 crit items, Deathbringer maybe, even when you're getting dove, you just out DPS. You have to be really good with relics on this character a lot of the times, but even then, I think she's still a very strong character just because of how easy she wins lane. Jing Wei, we're going to put an A tier also. You're guaranteed losing lane when you pick Jing Wei, but if you get to late game, a lot of the times you're just guaranteed win. I think she's one of the only good arrow gods in the game. If you just go arrow, Deathbringer, and then you're 2, you're critting nearly every auto, while also having a lot of lifesteal, also getting a lot of kins damage, and she builds pen then pretty easily. She's very hard to punish, one of the best late game hunters. She has good DPS on objectives because her 2 is just so busted, and then you don't want to be diving Jing Wei late game. You kind of have to one-shot her, and she can just play around her relics and her safety very, very easily. Marty, after his nerf, he's not doing all too well. I think he's still better than Cupid. So he's like high D, low C tier, but I think a lot of these hunters are just better than him. He's very easy to punish now in laning phase, pretty unsafe a lot of the times, so he's mostly just a mid laner. If you play him in mid, you might be fine. If you play him in duo, I think you're just losing a lot of 2v2s in duo. You trade ults pretty poorly now. I think he's still okay if you get late game because he's got a lot of area damage and Bluestone is very strong with him, but you have to get to late game, and it's hard to get to late game. You lose a lot of 2v2s. You don't win most 1v1s now until late game, and it's kind of just risky to play him because you're relying on your team to be able to peel you out, but I think he's still okay some games, but yeah, not great. Medusa after her buffs, I think she's pretty fine. I think she has got some bad matchups, some good matchups. She's pretty easy to kill late game, but she can pressure some shield camps. If she gets ahead, she's very, very hard to deal with because she just one-shots you, even if you're a jungler. A lot of times, though, she shouldn't get ahead because her 2v2... Her 2v2 is dependent on how good the enemy 2v2s is, but a lot of the top-tier gods are good clearing gods. I mean, Chernobog is AMC, Ishtar, and then... Once we get to some of the magical gods, they also have very good clear. So she should be behind a lot of the times, but it's not terrible. It's not Cupid bad, Apollo bad. If she gets ahead, again, very hard to 1v1. A lot of the times she shouldn't be getting ahead. Objective fights, she's okay, but when you're fighting around objectives, a lot of times you're just getting dove by assassins and warriors, and then your dash is one of the worst dashes in the game. But if you're ahead, you can dash aggressively and just one shot. So it's... trade-off. Neith is so bad. She is not a good character. Barely better than Heim, but she is better than Heim because I think she's just slightly more impactful. I think she's okay in mid lane, but I think she's bad in ADC. She loses nearly every 2v2. She doesn't win 1v1s. Her gank setup in ranked is really useless a lot of the times because you're not calming it. She is a bad character. Don't play her. Rama. Basically Izanami, but slightly worse in the laning phase and way better in the mid game and the late game. The problem is that early game matters a lot in ranked. A lot of people are just losing games just from that early game. So that's why Izanami is so far up and Rama is also just right with her even. Even though he's way better mid game, way better late game, Izanami's early game is just slightly better, but that slightness matters so much that I'm going to keep Izanami up here. He's a very good 1v1 character. He falls upon ganks very easily because of how much damage his ult does. Pretty hard to 1v1, and he has really good 1v1s. He has some bad matchups in the jungle, but it doesn't really matter. Overall, I think he's a pretty good character. Skadi, it depends on the level you're playing at. If you're bronze up to platinum, she is right here with Chernobog. If you're diamond and above, she's really bad. We'll put her in D tier because I think I'd rather just have her lower down the list because if somebody opens up a tier list and they see Skadi in A tier, they're going to freak. We'll put her in D tier, but keep in mind, if you're a low-level player and you are allowed to just 1v1 the enemy ADC and you don't really get ganked to get punished, and then you can scale into late game and kind of just one-shot, yeah, she's good. Ullr, I think Ullr's really bad. I think his build right now fine, but I think his damage is really, really low. I think he doesn't really win any 1v1s. He doesn't really win any 2v2s. I will say, though, late game Ullr is pretty strong right now. No longer is Ullr that early game bully. He is pretty bad early game, pretty bad mid game, I guess. And then a lot of the times you're in that mid game and you're just behind because of how bad the character is. And then when you get to late game, Bluestone, Crusher, Heartseeker, all that good stuff, you can be a really effective player, but it is just not worth it. And then lastly, Xbal. I think Xbal is really good because of how OP his ult is in ranked. It's very hard to see what's happening. Nobody can really communicate. Your teammates spam. Enemy ultimate is down when Xbal ults. He's got a pretty good laning phase. Not great. It's kind of like Medusa's where it's dependent on who you're playing against and kind of who your support is. But he's very good mid game. He's very good late game. He has some bad matchups, obviously. Fenrir is classic. But even then, a lot of times he can just live it and get through to late game and then just be a crit monster with a lot of extra power from his passive. Next up, Ullr S tier. Ullr is absolutely busted. Incredible 1v1, incredible 2v2. He can lose some games because of how bad he is into some junglers, i.e. dodgy, but it doesn't really matter. He dominates the 2v2 so hard that he'll just be a huge monster, and then you try to kill him and it doesn't matter. He'll just kill your entire team. If you have good relics, it's also so much harder to play into him, and it kind of is dependent on how good your ults are also. But yeah, Chernobog and Ullr are absolutely busted. And then also in the S tier, Freya, her build right now is insane. She's one of the few gods in the game that wins the 1v1 versus Ullr easily. Her weakness is her 2v2 against Ullr specifically is bad because of how quick Ullr clears, and then she's on the back foot. And then if Ullr can get far enough ahead, he can actually win the 1v1, but it is very hard to get that far ahead. Freya, the best 1v1 god in the game. If you're playing against a Freya, do not 1v1 her. If you're playing as Freya, force every 1v1 you can once you finish your... Actually, just force every 1v1 you can. You win at almost any point in the game. Late game, you scale okay. Not insane, and it's a little risky playing a double magical backline if you're playing against something that builds full tank with some anti-heal. But even then, you should win the game because you're playing Freya and just killing the enemy ADC off cooldown. Chronos, put him right here in F tier. He is so bad. He's like Neith, just really bad. Doesn't do anything well. Loses a lot. Stinks. Bad, smells. He's not 6 feet tall. He's actually really short. He keeps time, but I've been keeping time on him winning games, and it's very low. That wasn't funny, but he's bad. And then Soul, we'll put Soul in like D tier. I think she's okay. She's got a couple decent matchups. Like, she has a good matchup into Ullr because she just 2s ults and he can't get away from it. But other than that, she's not that good. She does dominate most 2v2s because of how OP her passive is, but she's got a really bad mid game and I think a really bad late game because she just dies to a lot of junglers, but it can be okay, I guess. I wouldn't play her. I don't think there's a reason to play her, so Soul, D tier. But yeah, there it is, the ADC tier list. I know it's not an actual ADC giving you guys the rundowns for the builds and for the actual tier list, but I played the game at a very high level. I know a lot about these gods. I know why they're played, why they're not played. I just don't hit autos as well as those guys do. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys have a wonderful first day. I'll see you guys again next time. Peace.